The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on January 2nd, 2023. Man, we've made it halfway through the Biden administration. We're still standing, which is just absolutely amazes me. I mean, we haven't quite fallen the way we had that exit in Afghanistan about a year and a half ago. That seems like forever ago, but it's anyway. So we've got a lot of other crazy stuff to talk to you about for the new year, and but before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have a special guest today, John Cameron. He is a writer, self-described freedom fighter, and occasional host and contributor to the Libertarian Counterpoint, which is our kind of like our sister show. And so anyways, let's jump into it. We are talking about the crazy spending. It's funny, you know, we just went through several crazy years of spending with COVID, where we just added trillions of dollars to the debt. And same old. It's a new year, but same old swamp. Just before the end of the year, we had elected a conservative House, and so we were kind of hoping maybe some of that spending might get stifled a little bit, but the RINOs teamed up with the Dems and short-circuited the new GOP House. So maybe I can get a visual on the story here. So they passed a $1.7 trillion spending bill just before the new GOP House would come into play. And so that was guys like Mitch McConnell teaming up with the Dems to make sure they got all their spending wishes in before the purse strings tightened a little bit, I guess. And let me just show you a little bit about what some of this means as far as, so essentially, it's a $1.38 trillion deficit is what we had in the last fiscal year. And so essentially our spending outweighing the revenue that was pulled in, and revenue is kind of a kind word. That's just how much the government took from us. Government isn't generating any of that on its own. But let me show you big picture. This is the CBO, and this is sort of, what it looks like as far as the amount of debt to our gross domestic product that we have. And, we haven't seen these levels since World War II that we're currently at. And so it's about 100% debt to GDP. And this is the Congressional Budget Office. So this is our government telling this. This isn't, just some libertarian who's trying to scare us all into, running away from government. This is literally the government telling us these numbers, okay? The CBO.gov. And they're literally showing the projection going right off the charts, to maybe 200% up there in the future. And this actually kind of short circuits it in their more recent ones, because they don't really show the past scale. And here's another view of this same chart, but it goes farther into the past, and so you can really gives you a better sense of where a country's been, what causes these big spikes in government spending and sort of its footprint into our lives. And so you can see, things like World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, these kind of spending things. But then, boy, I tell you, we had our housing crisis, the war on terror, and then of course we had the recent COVID pandemic. And boy, I tell you, these are things where we just spend. And what do we got to show for it at this point? Not much. We're just heading right off into the future. And boy, I tell you, we don't seem to be taking any warning signs from it. So I'll let you guys jump into it.
One thing I want to remind people is that during World War II, much of that debt, way more than it is happening today, was paid with existing dollars that people had in their own possession and savings and so on. And it was being used by buying war bonds and things like that, where they're buying a debt a debt instruments that is when it's paid back, it's existing dollars that already exist. In contrast with today, more and more of the debt is being financed. Matter of fact, almost all of it. If you talk to or listen to David Stockman, he'll explain how that works out and why that number is true. That all the debt is being financed with brand new money. This is newly created money. So, back when it was 120% of GDP in World War II, that 120% represented existing dollars. Very important to remember this. And today, it's all with brand new printed money that they are injecting into the monetary system. So, case in point, really. And when you look at those two peaks, you go, oh, well, look, we dwindled it down after World War II really quickly. And we did. Why? Because it's existing dollars being paid back with existing dollars. Big, huge, and important distinction.
And one other thing to add to that, Tim, as well, we also were one of the most productive economies after World War II as well.
Yes,
so, I mean, our production skyrocketed, and this is debt to GDP. So it's showing those two relative to one another. If we were just showing debt, we wouldn't be showing much of it going down. It would just be headed mostly up the whole way. So
right. Yeah, that's another important thing to look at. Yeah.
But all of this just shows that swamp creature is alive, very much alive, and is still doing all the things that was done previously. The Republicans really talk a very good game. Before the elections, they always tell us, oh, they're going to get in there, they're going to do something about the debt, they're going to stop the spending, blah, 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 they're going to lower taxes and all this sort. They talk a very good game. Many of us fall for it. Many of us continue to fall for it. But every time we turn around, we see these people getting in bed with the swamp creatures of Washington, D.C., and doing all the things they say they were not going to do. Look at this $1.7 trillion that just have been passed. And look at the atrocities that are embedded in there. One of them is a walking trail named after Michelle Obama that we taxpayers are going to pay for. What the hell do we need that for? What is the national emergency that will require us to have some trail spending millions of dollars named after Michelle Obama?
Well, Leon, they've got to send you off on a trail somewhere to take your mind off of what's happening in Washington. Sorry, go ahead.
But the point is though, the Republicans, I mean, we know what the Democrats do, okay? Tax and spend. That's their line of work. But Republicans always talk this good game, and they always fail, and they fail badly. Whenever there's anything that requires them to stand up and to show some backbone, they always show that the spineless creatures that they are. God help us.
Yeah. John, did you want to jump in on this issue at all, or?
Well, no, you got 3 or 4 days. We could dissect it. No, it's I agree with Leon. The word he's hit the nail on the head. I think it's 1984. The people say one thing and do another, and they pick teams. And the people on the left, I'm not going to call them liberals because they're not. Talk about equity and making things fair and helping those less fortunate that they support actually make more people less fortunate and hurt people and don't accomplish what they're saying. And then the Republicans talk, the people on the right, about safety and fiscal restraint, and then they just give the money to their favorite people. So it's 1984. I mean, it's a duopoly, and for a while there I had hope with the Tea Party, but I don't know what happened to that. Now somehow the lamestream press has found a way to make fiscal restraint and fiscal responsibility somehow cruel and somehow unnecessary. And I think Tim was talking about, and I think 30% of millennials now look favorably upon communism, and we don't have a whole lot of people trying to sneak across the border from places like Singapore and Luxembourg and Switzerland. Where they're coming from are places where the kind of government we got is taking it to another level. So I don't know what there is to be done about it, but I absolutely agree. I mean, no civilization in history has ever lasted with a fiat currency, which we have, and somehow the powers that we let be have convinced people that this time it can be different, and it can't. It can't. But I don't know how you get people to wake up to that fact, because they don't teach anything other than basically socialism or even Keynes. He would roll in his grave looking at this stuff, and he's the guy that kind of led us down this path. The power of all these government unions and everything to feather their own nests. FDR, the starting commie president, maybe it's the second one, but certainly the one who had all these huge spending projects. He said that government unions shouldn't be allowed and were evil. So I don't know where we're going. I mean, maybe you guys got ideas on how to stop it. We know it's bad. We know it's horrible, but nobody, as Leon said, has the guts to deal with it.
Well, the incentives are just always wrong with government. I mean, it's essentially you always have the incentive as you put more power into government for more concentrated interest to come and pull at it and try and get it in their direction. And bigger you can make it, the more arms you have pulling at it. And and sadly, as Tim said, a lot of this is new money, which we're starting to see in the form of inflation. And yet we have these jokers who call themselves economists like Paul Krugman's running around telling us that we should be essentially printing more money, which, it's funny because if you look back at him about 20 years ago, he was actually a person who was saying that we should be spending or a little more careful about what we spend. I mean, it's like these guys, they're feeding off the public trough too, and that's their shtick now, is to be sort of the high priest of telling us, why and how we should be just ignoring all the flashing red signs and red lights that we're heading over a cliff, and to just keep on printing and keep on, growing government.
He also predicted the internet would impact the economy as much as a fax machine too. So I don't put a single.
And they gave him a Nobel Prize in economics.
So I don't care what he says; he's full of it.
Yeah.
No, I remember. To add to that, I was just looking. So I take the New York Times. And I started looking at some of their old articles, and they had articles about when Jimmy Carter decided to inflate to get rid of the deficit, and then the head of the Fed at that time had some chutzpah and put the brakes on, and they very specifically talked about the causes of inflation, and they were printing too much money. Basically it was the government spending more money than it had. But now the newspaper of record for the United States of America has Paul Krugman, who I got a socialist, the coffee house that I talk to every once in a while just for amusement. And he was talking about, Paul Krugman says, and I said, Krugman's an idiot. And he said, no, he's a Nobel Prize winner. And I said, the Nobel Prize is a bunch of lefties giving awards to other lefties. Mm-hmm. So, the idea that somebody in the social science world should hold up a Nobel Prize in economics as a license to be a mouthpiece is crazy.
Well, and consider that Obama was
man's
literally
idiot.
given.
Anybody.
Well, Obama was literally given the Nobel Peace Prize before he did anything to merit it, and then he went on to be the biggest drone bomber the world has ever known. So I don't, it's just like you said, it's sort of a way lefties sort of reward each other, and to the point where it's so delusional they don't even have to run the race to get the award.
Exactly. You just have to be present, just like Obama was.
Yeah.
Lefties giving stuff to lefties. And I mean,
Well,
the Pulitzer Prize for journalism is the same thing. Lefties giving good stuff to lefties. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, didn't some of those Russia guys wind up getting the Pulitzer too? The ones who claimed that Trump was in the tank for Russia the whole time?
Yeah, I believe the New York Times got a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of the Russia hoax, and they were telling us about all of these great things that were happening and all this.
Of course, they didn't call it the Russia hoax; they called it news. That was
exactly.
really important stuff that we all had to be aware of. Yeah. But anyways, aside from all the magical thinking of the left, and we didn't even get into the magic monetary theory or modern monetary theory. Well, we do have something that is a real scientific breakthrough that's maybe can change some of the ways things are going. So there was a recent breakthrough at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories on nuclear fusion. And so essentially they have generated a net energy gain in a fusion process that they have going on in their labs. And this is a Wall Street Journal story that we have. And if this pans out, I mean, if this, concept that was proven in a lab actually carries over to the to the marketplace, perhaps maybe in a generation or so we might be seeing some what do you call it grid scale power plants that might be running on this stuff. So what do you guys think about this? Are you guys have you guys followed up on this? And because boy, I tell you, if this turns out to be real, it really kind of diffuses the whole climate concern, because essentially you've got a carbon-free source that doesn't have the issues of nuclear waste from fission that scares the lefties so much that they won't address that, even though they say that climate is an existential threat. So go figure. But
I think lefties are the existential threat.
But this might diffuse them on climate. Anyways, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of nuclear, even when it's fission. It's but this is, it's a step in the right direction. And this is what a friend of mine, what used to be my student, who is a nuclear physicist, actually, and it's what he told me a long time ago. This is all. He used to work at San Onofre before they shut it down, and this is the real solid. If you want to have a solid future in production of electrical energy that is repeatable and doable and actually can work, not like wind and solar, all that nonsense, but getting 1-2% of the energy needs at best ever, no matter what. And because the wind blows, the sun doesn't always shine just right, and blah blah. But anyway, this is the future, and if we squander this opportunity for these vested interests in this the so-called renewables, then once again we're just going to go down the rabbit hole of leftism and get lost down there with what's her name, Alice.
I thought it was Sorry.
We were talking about the military industrial complex and the education industrial complex. Well, there's also an energy industrial complex, and it involves the government and some of the environmental left creating this panic, shall we say, this whole nonsense about climate change, as if the climate have not been changing since the beginning of time. But what is going on here? You see this breakthrough, if it ever becomes commercialized, it is radically going to change everything, because this whole thing about renewable energy about the wind and the sun. This whole thing about renewable energy is nothing but a hoax. It is garbage. It is nonsense. There's no such thing called renewable energy to start with. We can talk about that, but there's no such thing. But this thing could really change our energy profile worldwide. It really could if it could become commercialized. Because we need, sure, you could argue that we need clean energy. We need actual clean energy. We're not talking about wind and solar, which is claimed to be clean. It is not clean. Because if it was really clean, we should be asking all the dead birds how clean it really is. It is not. Okay? But this thing has the potential to be clean and potentially to be actually be quote unquote renewable. We need this. If we could get it commercialized, where we could have this fusion energy, where we could be part of the electrical profile here, the power generation profile in the United States or worldwide. But the point is, though, this energy industrial complex is going to create all kind of problems in this thing becoming commercialized because they have this vested interest. Jason spoke about the vested interest involving the swamp creatures. This invested interest in terms of energy is huge, is very huge. My former employer, the California Energy Commission, is heavily invested in this renewable nonsense. And they will continue to be as long as Gavin Newsom and company continue to run the state into the ground.
Yeah, and I believe, Leon, is it by 2030 they're supposed to have 33% renewables or something like that on as part of the grid mix or something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think by 2045 or something like that, it is supposed to be almost 100% or some nonsense like that. Solar and wind is not dispatchable. Okay, it is doing nothing but making the grid unstable. Now I don't know if it was responsible for the blackouts that we had recently here. My house was part of that. I don't know if that was part of the problem, but it is making the grid unstable, the solar and wind, and it cannot replace fossil fuels. It cannot. So this nonsense about, oh, we're gonna solve the climate change with solar and wind, that's a pipe dream at best. It's a pipe dream.
I absolutely agree. And gentlemen, I didn't realize the show was going to go this long. I'm going to have to get off in a couple of minutes, and people accuse me of always having the last word. So I want to say something and then have somebody else say the last word. I don't think if you look at the article and go in depth in it, it's kind of misleading. And it's misleading in the fact that inside the reaction, there was a net energy gain, but outside the reaction, it took, I don't know, 500 million watts of external energy to create the thing that was net gain on the inside. I don't know if fusion is 60 years, fusion has been 20 years away. It's 20 years away, it's 20 years away, it's 20 years away. But I think the point here is that it's never going to be even if they have a breakthrough, they will never let it become commercially feasible, because then all the people that have their fingers in their trotters in the trough won't have their trotters in the trough. The reason we don't have nuclear power in this country everywhere is because Jimmy Carter wrote a little law in the 70s that said we can't recycle nuclear fuel in this country if it ever at any stage in this recycling process becomes weapons grade material. The French have been doing this without any problems at all. They have no nuclear waste. They have 3 to 5% of nuclear waste we do for the last 40 years. Yeah. The French aren't as beholden to the Russians for energy because they have nuclear power, even though it's going to get worse because the government is just taking it over. Fission power, Michael Schellenberger, if you're not familiar with him, listen to him. He's done some wonderful stuff about nuclear power. And then in about 3 minutes, I'm going to go I got to. I apologize. I didn't know how long this thing was going to run. So if somebody wants to have the last word and I can sit there and nod, that'd be a great thing before I
I
get
don't
out.
want the last.
Before I
I
get
don't
out.
want the last. I don't want the last word. But yeah, my my friend told me about that legislation that John just mentioned, and my friend was talking about fission, not fusion, and he was talking about the ways in which there are today the ability, like John pointed out about the French, to have almost zero waste, and it's
Yes.
very easily taken care of. And so, yes, it's
I'm going to sign off. I'm sorry. I got
okay.
the previous and I didn't know we were going to go. I really appreciate you having me on, folks. I'll try to dial in
Thanks,
my
John.
computer a little better next time and talk less. So I'll see you later.
Thanks so much, John. And that's
Take care,
John
John.
Cameron powering out.
Yes, he is. Yes, he
Go
is.
ahead, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. It's just the future is nuclear, whether it's fusion, fission, or whatever it is. That's our our future. If we want to have a future where we have adequate electrical energy production and do it in a way that is sustainable and sustainable. That's it.
Well, it definitely is something where, the bottom line is whatever type of energy you have, it has to be cost effective and it has to be base load. It can't be something where
Yes.
it happens to be plentiful one day and then non-existent the
Yeah.
next. You got to have a certain percentage of it that's just base load energy. And so this, whether it's nuclear fission or nuclear fusion, clearly both of those can be base load. Both of those don't put out greenhouse gases. And if it truly is, if climate change truly is an existential crisis, as we heard so many times, like, are we at the 12-year mark where AOC said we were all going to be game over? I don't know, but
No, we're
but
getting
regardless, if
we're not there yet, but we're getting
okay,
close. But she
yeah,
already took that back. She said, "Oh, she was joking," that kind of damn
okay.
nonsense.
Well, the bottom line is we've heard this existential line, and of course she wasn't laughing when she said it, and she was saying
Right.
it to an audience where she was dead serious as she was saying it. This is, if you truly are making a real argument and you're saying this is something that is a fundamental crisis to our existence, then that means that nuclear literally is a tool in the toolbox that at least solves that problem. So the idea that so many people have been just, I guess, petrified of that shows, I guess, maybe how serious the actual climate crisis is to those people, that you have this solution and they're not willing to consider it. It shows maybe their motives really aren't what they say they are. I
Well, of
guess with
course.
some of these people.
I mean, even if you will concede that this climate change is a crisis, I don't. Okay, but let's suppose I am wrong about that. But if we're gonna say that is, then we have to look for solutions that make sense. Because this thing about solar and wind is going to solve our problems is damn nonsense. It really is. There's no
Yeah.
amount of solar and wind that you can build that is going to solve the problem. It is not dispatchable. We cannot get around that fact. This is an engineering reality. It is not. And still they want to insist that this is the way to solve this problem, this climate crisis. There's no such thing, but it's okay. Let's suppose there is. But this solar and wind cannot solve that problem. It's not engineering. The engineering feasibility is non-existent.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because it really shows what a cult the left has been on this, because one of the people Obama had appointed to be his Secretary of Energy, and that was Stephen Chu, and he was a
Mm,
Nobel Prize winning physicist, and he told anybody who would listen, look, nuclear has to be part of the solution, he said.
right.
And yet the left just completely ignored it, like he didn't say anything. He tried to act like he wasn't in the room. So it's this really shows you, I think, that this is if we're going to be serious and we want to have a serious discussion on this stuff, then you can tell how serious the other side is if if they're literally going to reject one of the tools in the toolbox and then tell us it's an existential crisis. But this has got me good and triggered, Tim, and that means it's time for Good Guys with Guns. So you want to tell us about your most recent dive into that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Most certainly. This comes from Milwaukee in last August of this year. A woman, or last year now, sorry. A woman defending her children shot and killed an intruder who broke into her home on Monday morning. The mother who asked, and pardon my throat, the mother who asked not to be identified told TMJ4 News that she was in the shower when she heard her 12 and 14-year-old children screaming from the living room. Without hesitation, she raced to her bedroom, grabbed her gun, and ran into the hallway to face down the intruder. She said, I wonder what she was wearing. Just curious. It all happened so fast, an adrenaline rush, she said. The man, she said, was already being attacked by her 2 pit bulls, but she shot him multiple times because he wouldn't stop coming. The mother said the intruder appeared to be in his late 30s and was acting erratically. Milwaukee police have not identified the man. They arrested the woman but released her several hours after questioning. Police said they won't be releasing any more information and the incident will be referred to the district attorney's office. The mother and her children were frightened and they plan to move out once they're able to find a new home. A neighbor and a community activist, I love that, community activist, helped clean up the crime scene after authorities removed the body. I don't know, why did they throw that in there? The mother brought the gun 10 years ago, she said, after discovering a man sleeping under her son's bed. She said she hoped she'd never have to use it. I know I'd be able to do it, shoot the intruder, she said, to protect my kids. And so there we have it. Once again, you gun grabbers, you want to grab that woman's gun, take it away from her. She's trying to own it legally. Would you rather leave her defenseless against erratic acting 30-year-old men in her house? Would you like to do that, Mr. Gun and Miss Gun Grabber? Grab it. Grab hers. Because I know you love guns. You just love the government's guns. You love the police to have their guns. You're not against guns. You just don't want us normal people, us unwashed tax-paying minions to have guns. You just want the big guy with the badge and the boots. You want him to have his gun because that's the only way you're going to take away my guns and Leon's guns and Jason's guns and this woman's guns is with your guys' guns that you love beyond a doubt.
Indeed.
Well, one of the things in the story that struck me is that I believe it said that it said that they are going to be referring the incident to the district attorney's office. So, it's funny. I mean, we've just seen all these cases with, constantly where people are robbing and burning down stores and everything, and none of that appears to get referred to the district attorney's office. But boy, you defend yourself, and you're on the hot seat.
Yeah, social justice always put you on some high moral ground that you don't need to be prosecuted for burning and looting and all these other things that, like the summer of 2020, on this high moral ground, you can stand there and do as you please, but we don't have to worry about prosecution of these people because of social justice. But the ironical thing about Tim, what you just said, about the left loving guns as long as they're in the hands of the police or in the government. Those are guns that we pay for. We pay for them, but we can't have them, but they could. This is really, really amazing.
To add insult to injury, but
injury. Exactly.
Yeah, the district attorneys have to rule on any kind of homicide. That's a homicide. Someone died, and so they will have to rule that as either justified or take it to trial if it was ruled unjustified. But I don't know what the outcome was, but it certainly sounds like it went the right way. Hopefully.
Yes.
Well, speaking of people standing up for themselves, I wanted to take us to a story that we talked briefly about in a earlier podcast in the year, but I kind of wanted to bring us back to this because, when we compare sort of what's happening in different places around the world with liberty, um, we see kind of a shocking lack of standing in a lot of Western countries up for our rights. But in places that we consider much more authoritarian, there's people who are standing up and dying for their rights right now. And so I wanted to kind of bring our focus onto that. And so in Iran, of all places, they had a problem earlier this year where I guess the sort of morality police, I guess they're labeled. I don't know if that's like the Secret Service in Iran or whatever it is, but there was a woman who wouldn't wear her hijab, I guess, which is kind of a headscarf, and so that she was arrested. And apparently they beat her to the point where she wound up dying later, and that wound up fueling a bunch of protests. And so this was the woman's name was Masa Amini, I guess. And so, and she was only 22 years old. So, young woman, prime of her life, and, essentially beaten down by the government in that country to her death. And so people started standing and protesting for it. And it's led to situations like this Bloody Friday, it was called, which was back in late December. And, in that particular day, I guess it was, well, I guess they're saying here it was around September 30th that dozens of protesters were killed. But this particular story was written on December 20th. But anyways, the point is that dozens and dozens of people getting killed there, standing up for their rights and standing up for the rights of women in that country. And it really kind of puts a point on what are we doing in this country, and to the point where in the World Cup that happened recently back in November, the Iranian soccer team stood in unity and would not sing their country's national anthem, which might be a big problem for those guys when they go back to their country with their
Yeah.
government. So I mean, they were literally taking their own lives and their and their futures in their hands.
Or their
By
or their families, Jason. Their families also.
Exactly, yeah. And so
Mm.
I just think it's really worth sending a shout out to these people in Iran. The idea that they're really standing up for their liberty at the moment, and I just thought it was worth mentioning on the show. Did you guys want to say anything about that?
I think anywhere we see people fighting for liberty, I think is a good thing, and I think it's something that we should support. I mean, Iran have a very long history. Some of it involve uh, some actions, some unethical actions, I should say, by our own government involved in Iran. But where we see people fighting for liberty is something that we really, really should support. And I think, and Jason, I think the word is hijab, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
That, yeah, I believe so. And it was such a tragic case involving this woman. But if her death could spark this fight for liberty, then she would not have died in vain. I mean, it's tragic. She was only 22 years of age, of course, but she would not have died in vain if it could truly spark this revolution and spark changes in the whole structure of the government. You see, in Iran and many of these countries, some of these countries in the Middle East, there's no separation between the government and religion, which is Islam in this particular case. There's no separation there. So the religion and the government is one and the same, essentially. But if it could bring about those sort of changes where you could get that separation, where you can have some sort of democratic values, I'm not saying the democratic values that we have here in the United States, but if you could bring about in the long term, of course, bring about something like this, then the death of this young woman would not be in vain.
Tim, do you want to jump in on this one, or?
Well, no, I think Leon covered it really well. Yeah, I mean, it was a tragedy, and I hope I hope, and this is the kind of thing that is fomented better if the United States stays out of trying to mess with the economy of Iran, which, this is just my economics talking here, is more and more protests occur when the leadership of the country is not the only resource for getting food on the table. So if you allow trade to happen between the whole world and Iran, that leads to more freedom. That leads to more the ability of people to protest, and the lessening of the power invested into those at the top. And this is just an economic fact that has been seen throughout history. That when the people are allowed to trade, they become more independent. And when you stifle trade to Iran, and it doesn't hurt the people at the top. They're still going to get their food on the table. But when you stifle trade, the people down below are the ones that are hurt. And when you hurt them, they have less power because they're less independent, and they have to basically seek the power of the or they not seek it, but they have to allow it. They just don't have any time and resources to spend on it because they're impoverished by your trade barriers that we have set up with Iran. So my advice, if you really want to see more of this kind of protest, and they're doing it in spite of our trade embargoes that we have with Iran. But if you want to see more of this, then create trade, because that's what empowers economies is trade. It's like, okay, what? It's like I just said the sky is blue. That's all I said. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's all I just said. And so if you want more of this in Iran, let's start trading. Let's open up trade, and we'll get more of this and less of the Ayatollahs.
Well, it's not just exchange too, but also to competition of ideas, and in this case, sports. We're seeing that was a platform for these brave athletes to stand up and show their protest to the world. But it's funny too, because at the same time that they are trying to stand up for their freedom of expression, just something as simple as what they're allowed to wear on the street, this freedom of an idea. And yet we seem to be, we have almost half the country here that seems to be comfortable with giving the government authority to shut people down on speech based. We've seen Biden try to push essentially a ministry of truth behind COVID, and we've seen the same thing happening here in California, where they are pushing a law that just came into effect, where if your doctor doesn't toe the government's line on COVID, he can have his license removed, and therefore his means of and that's your freedom to have an honest discussion with your doctor that's at stake there. So, I mean, that's your medical freedom that's on the line with freedom of speech here. So it cascades everywhere, and we're seeing people in places like Iran stand up for it, and we're seeing ourselves just sort of saying, how can the government make me safe and silent?
But Jason, you were talking about the government and speech here in the United States. Look at what is being disclosed with the Twitter files. We had an agent of the government, the FBI, working with Twitter to suppress speech. This is what is going on. I mean, the FBI is the people with the guns and the people who are supposed to be out there persecuting, looking for terrorists and criminals and doing that kind of stuff. But we had them working, an agent of the government, working with a private company to suppress our speech. This is a clear violation, a clear constitutional violation. And
silence for safety.
Our safety. Yes.
Yes,
our safety.
The FBI can't find. They don't have enough of their time occupied finding terrorists because they don't exist. That's why They
Yeah,
have
that
so
will
much
except
time on their hands.
at school board meetings they exist
Yeah,
apparently, and
Yes,
those
apparently.
parents need to be
exactly.
rounded up.
Exactly.
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
because they're so busy chasing all those horrible terrorists all throughout the land that they want us to believe that these terrorists exist and that, oh my God, at any time we're going to be attacked. I mean, this is just so much BS. Is pathetic. Pathetic that people fall for it. Number one, and I see it every day when I go through security at the airport. Every single day, I see complete, total waste of people's energy and time chasing phantoms that don't exist. But the FBI, at least, has discovered that they have no terrorists, or very, very, very few to chase around. So instead, they're going to chase the average American citizen around. And that's what's happening today.
Well, I tell you, we're getting near the end of the show, so it's our time for our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, and that's where we try and find something that's a little bit odd or funny, or something that some, I guess, politician or other official has said. And in this case, we're going back to the World Cup, and it's funny because we saw a tremendous. Maybe we could get the visual up, James. We saw a tremendous act of bravery by the Iranian soccer team, and what they didn't say, and in their silence, what they voiced with their silence, and we juxtapose that to the FIFA president. FIFA is the organization that governs World Cup soccer, and he decided that he wanted to be heroic too at the games, and so he took the opportunity to give a monologue for about an hour to the audience about a chance to virtue signal on what he thinks that the values are, I guess, of that should be pursued by the West, and I guess his own personal identities. And so let me give you a little bit of the quote he said. He said, "We've been told for many, many lessons from some Europeans that Western world. I think for what we Europeans have been doing for the last 3,000 years, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons to people." And then he went on to give this litany of self-identity things to, I guess, get, maybe he thought he was Elizabeth Warren or something. I'm not sure. Assigning himself as an Indian identity. But he said, "Today I feel Qatari. Today I feel Arabic. Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel like a migrant worker." And then he went on to say too that he felt like a woman too. And he was trying to make some kind of a point that he was saying he understood the oppression that some of these groups have felt. But I mean, just this endless virtue signaling that some of these people have, and they want to take the world stage to give, where you juxtapose that to what those Iranian soccer players did, and they had something on the line, and they really gave it up for liberty in their country, whereas some of these people, they're just preaching to the cult. And I mean, that seemed very much like what this guy was doing. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I'm
Well, pretty
gonna
soon.
lead.
Go ahead, go
Let's
ahead.
let the last word have the last word. I'm just going to lead off and say that on one hand, I think that the West probably is not in a very enviable position to be lecturing other countries about human rights. And when I say that, I'm thinking specifically about our support of Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen that would not exist if it wasn't for our support, started by Obama and now continued through Trump, and Biden continues it in spite of the Congress saying we've got to get out of this BS with Saudi Arabia, our buddies, our head chopping off buddies. Okay. So, yes, the West has no room to be lecturing other countries about anything. And unless and until we withdraw our support on the Saudis' war on Yemen, the poorest country of the whole poor Middle Eastern countries, it's the worst. And until and unless we do that, then maybe we can start lecturing other people. And the rest of it is, the guy's, just a nutcase. Okay, the guy's a nutcase. However, He's got one point, and that is, and I just made it. And so, Leon, what do you think?
Well, I mean, this guy expressed all his identities that he feel like, and and since feelings so dictate so many of our policies and our thinking these days, pretty soon he'll be telling us about his multiple transitions that he'll be having. He'll be telling us about he'll transition to a woman, he'll transition to a gay person, he'll transition to a disabled person. He'll be telling us about his multiple transition in solidarity of all these oppressed groups. I wish him the best. I really do.
Well, I tell you, unfortunately, we don't have the stage that Gianni Infantino had, the FIFA president. But I think we've at least made it known what our feelings are on standing up for liberty and saying something versus just blowing a lot of hot air. So, anyways, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us for this first group of shows for 2023, and we hope you'll join us next week. And for more adventures and discussing issues of liberty. Until then, stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.